Welcome to this History Channel, where we bring the most fascinating and impactful chapters of history right to your screen. Today, we're diving deep into the rise and fall of some of the most powerful dynasties in China, from the Tang and Yuan dynasties to the resurgence of the Ming Dynasty. This is not just about dates and events, but about the lives, triumphs, and challenges that shape the world we live in today. As you listen to this history unfold, I promise you will want to hear it all. So sit back, relax, and let's explore China's rich and dramatic past, full of battles, innovations, and unforgettable stories. You won't want to miss a single moment. The Tang's literary output, which emphasized emotional expression, philosophical depth, and technical mastery, became a model for later generations of writers and scholars. The Tang Dynasty's reign over China coincided with a period of unprecedented cultural exchange, facilitated by the Silk Road, which connected China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. During this time, China was at the center of a vast network of trade and communication that extended across the Eurasian continent, and the Tang Dynasty's policies of openness and engagement with the world played a significant role in fostering this exchange. One of the most important aspects of the Tang Empire's foreign relations was its role as a hub for trade. The Silk Road, which had been established centuries earlier, was revitalized during the Tang period, and merchants from Central Asia, India, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire brought goods and ideas to China. In return, Chinese silk, tea, porcelain, and paper were exported along the Silk Road to distant lands, where they were highly prized. The Tang capital of Chang'an became a cosmopolitan city, home to merchants, diplomats, and travelers from across Asia and beyond. The bustling markets of Chang'an were filled with goods from all over the world, and the city became a melting pot of cultures, religions, and ideas. The Tang Dynasty's engagement with foreign cultures was not limited to trade. It also involved the exchange of knowledge and ideas. Buddhist monks, scholars, and pilgrims traveled along the Silk Road, bringing with them sacred texts, religious practices, and artistic traditions. The Tang Dynasty's support of Buddhism helped to spread the religion to other parts of Asia, including Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, where it took root and became a significant cultural force. In addition to Buddhism, other cultural and intellectual exchanges took place along the Silk Road. Tang China was exposed to new technologies, such as papermaking and printing, which would have a profound impact on Chinese society and culture in the centuries to come. Similarly, Chinese art and philosophy influenced other cultures along the Silk Road, leaving a lasting mark on the artistic traditions of Central Asia and the Middle East. The Silk Road was not only a route for the exchange of goods, but also a conduit for the transmission of scientific knowledge, particularly in the fields of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. Chinese scholars and traders brought knowledge of agricultural techniques, engineering innovations, and scientific discoveries to other parts of the world, while also learning from the advancements of other civilizations. This exchange of knowledge helped to lay the foundation for the intellectual achievements of the medieval world. By the late 9th century, the Tang Dynasty was facing mounting internal challenges, both politically and economically. The central government was increasingly weakened by corruption, internal divisions, and the growing power of regional military governors, known as judushi. The military commanders who were originally appointed to maintain control over distant provinces had gained significant autonomy, and many of them began to act as independent rulers, effectively controlling vast regions of the empire. This fragmentation undermined the emperor's authority, as these warlords focused more on their own interests than on serving the imperial court. The weakening of central authority was compounded by widespread corruption within the Tang bureaucracy. The eunuchs, who had long wielded significant influence in the imperial court, had become even more powerful by this time. The eunuchs often controlled key appointments and had the ear of the emperor, allowing them to manipulate decisions for their own benefit. Their meddling in state affairs created an atmosphere of intrigue and dysfunction, further eroding the efficiency of the imperial administration. The weakening of the government was not limited to the capital, Chang'an, where the emperor resided. The military, once a strong force under the early Tang emperors, had become increasingly ineffective. Regional military governors controlled large armies, and the imperial court was unable to effectively coordinate a response to the growing number of uprisings and rebellions that were spreading throughout the empire. As a result, the Tang dynasty's ability to defend its borders and maintain internal order was severely compromised. In 755, the Lushan Rebellion broke out, one of the most catastrophic events in Tang history. Lushan, a military governor, rebelled against the emperor, capturing the capital and briefly overthrowing the imperial government. Though the rebellion was eventually quelled, it severely weakened the Tang dynasty. The empire was left vulnerable to further military threats, and the central government's power continued to deteriorate. After the Lushan rebellion, the Tang emperors attempted to restore central authority but struggled against the growing power of the Jadushi and the entrenched corruption within the court. Despite some efforts at reform, the dynasty's decline seemed inevitable. The political situation continued to deteriorate, and by the early 10th century, the Tang government was in a state of collapse, unable to control the empire's vast territories. One of the final blows to the Tang dynasty came during the reign of Emperor Wuzong, r. 840 to 846, a ruler who sought to consolidate imperial power and address the growing influence of Buddhism, which had become a significant force within the empire. Wuzong was a devout Taoist and saw Buddhism as a foreign influence that was detrimental to the traditional values of Chinese society. His reign is marked by one of the most infamous episodes in Chinese history, the Great Anti-Buddhist Persecution. Buddhism had flourished during the Tang period, thanks in part to the support of emperors like Taizong and Wu Zetian, and the religion had become deeply integrated into Chinese culture. However, by the mid-9th century, Buddhist monasteries and temples had amassed significant wealth and land, and many Buddhist monks had grown influential, both politically and socially. This wealth and influence, combined with the growing power of Buddhist institutions, alarmed the imperial court, especially as the Tang emperors struggled to maintain control over their increasingly fragmented empire. Emperor Wuzong's persecution of Buddhism was brutal and sweeping. In 845, he issued an edict that ordered the closure of Buddhist temples, the destruction of Buddhist texts, and the forced conversion of Buddhist monks and nuns to lay life. Thousands of temples were destroyed, and Buddhist artifacts and scriptures were burned. The confiscation of Buddhist property helped to fill the imperial treasury, but the persecution caused widespread unrest, and it significantly weakened the support for the Tang government among Buddhist communities. The anti-Buddhist persecution is often seen as a response to the growing power of Buddhist institutions, but it also reflects the broader issues of corruption and internal division within the Tang dynasty. The emperor's decision to target Buddhism was, in part, an attempt to reassert control over the empire by curbing the influence of powerful religious institutions. However, the persecution alienated many of the empire's Buddhist followers and led to social unrest. While Buddhism continued to be an important part of Chinese society after the persecution, its political influence was greatly diminished, and the backlash against Wuzong's actions contributed to the further destabilization of the Tang dynasty. This event, combined with ongoing political infighting and military decline, weakened the empire's ability to govern effectively and sealed its fate. As the Tang dynasty weakened in the late 9th century, the empire's vast territories were increasingly controlled by regional warlords, known as Jadushi. These military governors had been granted significant autonomy to govern the frontier regions, but over time, Many of them became independent rulers in all but name. Their growing power was a direct result of the central government's inability to control the military or manage the empire's far-flung provinces. The Jadushi exercised control over local military forces and often built personal armies that were loyal to them rather than the emperor. These military leaders were able to amass wealth and resources, and their growing independence eroded the authority of the central government. As the Jadushi grew more powerful, they began to act with increasing autonomy, collecting taxes, administering justice, and even challenging the emperor's authority. The central government could no longer maintain control over the Jadushi, and their influence only grew stronger as the Tang court became more fragmented. In 907, the final blow came when the military governor Yuan, who had been one of the most powerful figures in the empire, forced the abdication of the last Tang emperor, Emperor Ai, and proclaimed himself the ruler of a new dynasty, the later Yuan Dynasty. This marked the official end of the Tang Dynasty, though by this point, the empire had been in decline for many years. Zhu Wen's rise to power signaled the fragmentation of the Tang Empire into smaller, competing kingdoms, a period known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms. The political structure of the empire, which had once been unified and centralized, was now divided into multiple regions controlled by independent warlords. These regional powers fought for control of China, and the next few decades would be marked by chaos and warfare. Though the Tang Dynasty had officially ended, its cultural and political legacies persisted. Many of the institutions established during the Tang, such as the civil service exams and the legal code, continued to shape Chinese governance in subsequent centuries. The influence of Tang art, literature, and Buddhism also lived on, leaving a lasting imprint on Chinese civilization. The fall of the Tang Dynasty in 907 marked the beginning of a turbulent period in Chinese history, known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period. This era, lasting from 907 to 960, was characterized by political fragmentation, instability, and warfare, as several regional military governors, warlords, and competing factions vied for power. After the abdication of the last Tang emperor, Emperor Ai, Zhu Wan, a former military general, declared himself the ruler of the later Yuan Dynasty, marking the end of the Tang Dynasty and the beginning of the 5 Dynasties period. Zhu Wen's establishment of the later Yuan Dynasty was only the first in a series of short-lived and often unstable dynasties that ruled northern China during this period. Between 907 and 960, 5 different dynasties ruled the northern part of China, each struggling to maintain power and control over the vast territory once ruled by the Tang. The short-lived nature of these dynasties was indicative of the larger political instability that characterized this period, as each ruling family was replaced by another through military coups, assassination, and rebellion. The 5 dynasties consisted of the later Liang, later Tang, later Jin, later Han, and later Zhou. Despite the names and the attempts at consolidation, these dynasties had little to no lasting power. Their rulers were often military leaders who gained control through force and were frequently overthrown by rival factions or internal rebellion. The 5 dynasties were marked by constant warfare, and their power was largely confined to the northern part of China. The southern region, meanwhile, saw the emergence of several independent kingdoms, known as the 10 Kingdoms. The political instability of the 5 Dynasties period was a direct result of the breakdown of the centralized control that had characterized the Tang Dynasty. The military governors, or Jadushi, who had once been appointed to oversee frontier regions, had gained significant autonomy during the Tang period. As the Tang weakened, these regional leaders became more powerful and independent. The fragmentation of the empire into several competing factions was a direct consequence of the inability of the Tang court to maintain control over the Jadushi and the central government's declining power. The Five Dynasties period was a time of almost constant change in leadership, with one dynasty quickly replaced by another. This made it difficult for any of the dynasties to establish long-term stability. Although the northern part of China was dominated by these short-lived dynasties, the south was far more politically fragmented, with several independent kingdoms ruling over various regions. While northern China was fragmented by the rise and fall of the Five Dynasties, the southern region of the empire was equally fragmented into multiple independent states, collectively known as the Ten Kingdoms. These kingdoms were established by regional warlords who seized control of various parts of southern China after the collapse of the Tang Dynasty. Unlike the northern dynasties, the Ten Kingdoms were not bound by any overarching political or military framework. Each kingdom was ruled by a local warlord or military leader, and the region was marked by constant rivalry and conflict between these states. The Ten Kingdoms period was characterized by a high degree of regional autonomy and independence. The kingdoms had their own political systems, military forces, and administrative structures, and they often clashed with one another over territorial disputes. While these kingdoms were technically part of the larger Chinese empire, their rulers often acted as independent monarchs, and their loyalties to the central government in the north were tenuous at best. The Ten Kingdoms included a diverse range of political entities, from the Kingdom of Wu in the southeast to the Kingdom of Shu in the southwest. The Kingdom of Wu, based in modern-day Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces, was one of the largest and most powerful kingdoms of the period. The Kingdom of Shu, located in present-day Sichuan, was another significant state during this time, known for its cultural and intellectual achievements. One of the most notable kingdoms during this period was the Kingdom of Wuyue, located along the southeastern coast of China, around present-day Zhejiang and southern Jiangsu provinces. The Kingdom of Wuyue was an economically prosperous region, with thriving trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. The kingdom was ruled by the Qian family, who established a relatively stable and prosperous state in a period of political turmoil. Wuyue was known for its cultural achievements, particularly in poetry, painting, and ceramics. Despite the internal divisions within the Ten Kingdoms, there were some attempts at unification. In the north, the rulers of the later Yuan Dynasty sought to bring the southern kingdoms under their control, but these attempts were largely unsuccessful. In the south, many of the kingdoms sought to establish themselves as independent entities, free from northern influence. The lack of a central authority and the frequent military conflicts between the kingdoms prevented the creation of a unified Chinese state during this period. The Ten Kingdoms period was a time of intense regional competition, but it also saw cultural and economic growth. The kingdoms of the south were generally more prosperous than those of the north, as they benefited from the fertile land and the development of trade routes. In addition, the South became a center of cultural production, with many of China's greatest poets, artists, and scholars emerging from the region during this period. The Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period was ultimately brought to an end by the rise of the Song Dynasty, which succeeded in unifying China under a single rule after nearly half a century of fragmentation. The process of reunification began in the mid-10th century when the military leader Zhao Kuangyin, a general of the later Zhou, seized power and founded the Song Dynasty in 960. Zhao Kuangyin, later known as Emperor Taizu, was able to unite much of northern China under his rule by defeating the rival warlords of the Five Dynasties. His rise to power was marked by a coup within the later Zhou dynasty, during which he forced the abdication of the ruling emperor. After his victory, Zhao Kuangyin consolidated control over northern China and set his sights on the southern kingdoms. However, the process of reunification was not immediate. The southern states, particularly the Kingdom of Wuyue and the Kingdom of Chu, resisted Song expansion, and it took several decades of military campaigning before the entire country was brought under Song control. Despite the turbulence of the previous centuries, the Song dynasty was able to establish a relatively stable and centralized government, and it marked the beginning of a new era in Chinese history. The Song emperors consolidated their authority over the regions that had been controlled by the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, and they began to develop a more structured and effective bureaucracy. Under the Song, China entered a period of remarkable economic, cultural, and technological growth. The Song dynasty is known for its advancements in areas such as printing, gunpowder technology, agriculture, and the arts. This era, which included the Northern Song, 960 to 1127, and Southern Song, 1127 to 1279, periods saw the emergence of a strong commercial economy, a flourishing of arts and literature, and significant developments in science and technology. The reunification of China under the Song dynasty marked the end of the chaotic 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, and it paved the way for a new era of centralized governance, cultural achievements, and economic prosperity. The Song dynasty's legacy would profoundly shape the course of Chinese history for the centuries to come. The Song dynasty, founded in 960 by Zhao Kuangyin, marked the reunification of China after nearly 5 decades of fragmentation during the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. Zhao Kuangyin, later known as Emperor Taizu, was a military general who rose to prominence during the later Zhou, one of the last of the 5 dynasties. His ascendancy to the throne marked a pivotal moment in Chinese history, as he managed to unite the country under a single, centralized rule after years of political fragmentation. Emperor Taizu's rise to power was marked by a military coup within the later Zhou court, during which he seized the throne in 960, with the support of his loyal generals and military forces. However, instead of continuing the cycle of dynastic upheaval that had characterized the previous centuries, Taizu pursued a strategy of consolidation and reform that aimed to create stability in the empire. One of the first reforms he enacted was the restructuring of the military. He understood that a strong military was crucial for maintaining the power of the Song dynasty, but he also recognized the need to prevent military leaders from becoming too powerful, as had been the case during the 5 dynasties. To achieve this, he adopted the strategy of civilian control over the military, placing greater emphasis on the central bureaucracy and reducing the influence of local military governors, judushi. This was a key shift from the previous era, where military governors often exercised more autonomy than the central government. Another important reform Taizu implemented was the strengthening of the imperial examination system, which had been established during the Tang Dynasty but was expanded under the Song. The civil service examination became a central method of selecting government officials, allowing individuals to rise in status based on merit rather than birth. This reform contributed to the development of a more capable and professional bureaucracy, which helped the Song dynasty become one of the most efficient and well-governed empires in Chinese history. Taizu's reforms laid the foundation for the Song dynasty's political structure, which would later be characterized by a powerful central government, efficient bureaucracy, and a meritocratic system that valued education and administrative competence. While Taizu's reign was marked by stability and consolidation, it also set the stage for the challenges that would later confront the Song dynasty. Despite his success in unifying China, the Song dynasty faced significant military and territorial challenges, particularly from the north. The Song Empire was situated in a region prone to invasion, and the northern frontiers, especially against the Khitan Liao dynasty and later the Jurchen Jin dynasty, presented ongoing military threats. While the Song dynasty's bureaucratic and economic achievements were groundbreaking, its inability to fully address the military challenges from the north would eventually lead to its downfall. Despite facing external military threats, the Song dynasty experienced an unprecedented period of economic growth, marked by advancements in technology, agriculture, commerce, and industry. The Song economy flourished, transforming China into the world's most advanced and prosperous empire of the time. Several factors contributed to this economic boom, including the adoption of new agricultural techniques, the expansion of trade, and innovations in manufacturing. One of the most significant contributions to the Song economy was the introduction of new agricultural technologies. During the early years of the Song dynasty, advances in irrigation systems, the widespread adoption of fast-ripening rice, and improvements in plowing techniques led to increased agricultural productivity. This agricultural surplus allowed for population growth and the development of urban centers. The introduction of copper rice from Southeast Asia in the 11th century, which could be harvested twice a year, was particularly important as it increased rice production and helped feed a growing population. The growth of agriculture supported the rise of commerce and trade, both within China and abroad. The Song dynasty saw the development of a sophisticated market economy, with bustling urban centers such as Hangzhou, Kaifeng, and Guangzhou becoming major hubs for trade and industry. The Song government created a stable currency system, introducing the world's first government-issued paper money, which facilitated trade and commerce. This development helped foster a vibrant domestic economy, where merchants and artisans played an increasingly important role in society. Technological innovations were another key factor in the Song dynasty's economic success. The Song period saw the widespread use of printing, which revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge and information. The invention of movable type printing by Sheng in the 11th century allowed for the mass production of books, making literature, education, and scientific knowledge more accessible to a wider audience. This contributed to the Song dynasty's reputation as a cultural and intellectual hub. Additionally, the Song dynasty made significant advancements in other areas of technology, including gunpowder, naval technology, and metallurgy. Gunpowder, which had been invented during the Tang Dynasty, saw widespread use during the Song period in military applications, such as the development of firearms, bombs, and rocket-propelled missiles. The Song military's use of gunpowder would lay the foundation for later developments in warfare and the eventual spread of firearms to other parts of the world. Song shipbuilding technology also reached remarkable heights, with the development of advanced ships and navigation techniques that allowed Chinese merchants to travel long distances across the seas. The Song Navy played a significant role in securing maritime trade routes and protecting the empire's interests in the Indian Ocean and beyond. This period of technological innovation and economic prosperity not only fueled the Song dynasty's growth, but also had a lasting impact on the development of Chinese society and the world at large. The Song dynasty was a period of exceptional cultural and intellectual achievements, with advancements in art, literature, philosophy, and science. It was a time when Confucian ideals flourished, and scholars, poets, and artists made enduring contributions to Chinese culture. The Song period witnessed the development of distinct artistic styles and literary forms that became central to Chinese cultural identity. One of the most significant achievements of the Song dynasty was the flourishing of Chinese landscape painting. The Song period is considered the golden age of Chinese landscape art, and artists such as Fan Quan, Guoxi, and Zhang Zedwan produced iconic works that emphasized the beauty and majesty of nature. Landscape painting during the Song period was deeply influenced by Taoist and Confucian philosophies, with artists seeking to capture the harmony between humans and nature. These paintings often depicted serene, vast landscapes, highlighting the power and grandeur of nature while emphasizing humanity's smallness in comparison. The song landscape tradition would go on to influence generations of Chinese artists and become a central part of Chinese visual culture. Literature also thrived during the Song Dynasty, with a rise of CI poetry as one of the most important forms of expression. The CI genre, which involved setting poetry to music, reached its peak during the Song period. Poets such as Su Shi, Su Dongpa, Li Qing Zhao, and Lu Yu wrote CI poems that explored themes of love, longing, nature, and the political climate of their time. The Song period is often seen as the culmination of the classical Chinese poetic tradition, blending emotion, personal expression, and philosophical depth. The Song Dynasty also saw the continued development of Confucian thought, particularly the rise of Neo-Confucianism. Neo-Confucian philosophers, such as Zhu Xi, synthesized Confucian teachings with elements of Taoism and Buddhism, creating a new philosophical system that emphasized moral self-cultivation, social harmony, and the pursuit of knowledge. Neo-Confucianism became the dominant intellectual and ethical framework in China for centuries, shaping not only government and politics, but also education, literature, and personal conduct. In the realm of science and technology, the Song Dynasty produced some of China's most notable intellectual achievements. The Song government sponsored scholars who made important advances in fields such as astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Notably, the Song scholar Shen Kuo made significant contributions to the understanding of geomagnetism and the concept of magnetic compasses, while Su Song, an engineer and inventor, designed a hydraulic-powered astronomical clock tower that was a marvel of engineering for its time. The Song Dynasty's cultural and intellectual achievements were supported by an increasingly literate society. The expanded use of printing allowed books to be produced more efficiently and distributed to a wider audience, making knowledge more accessible to scholars and intellectuals throughout the empire. The spread of Confucian teachings and the rise of Neo-Confucianism helped maintain a strong intellectual tradition that shaped Chinese society for generations. The Song Dynasty, despite its cultural, intellectual, and economic achievements, faced persistent military challenges throughout its history. One of the central issues for the Song was the constant threat posed by powerful northern neighbors, particularly the Khitan Liao Dynasty and later the Jurchen Jin Dynasty. The Song's military difficulties were compounded by their policy of civilian control over the military, a reform implemented by Emperor Taizu to prevent the rise of powerful military factions like those that had destabilized the Tang Dynasty. However, this policy inadvertently weakened the military and led to several vulnerabilities in the empire's defense system. At the start of the Song Dynasty, Emperor Taizu consolidated his power by reducing the influence of the military governors, Jidushi, and instituting a system where civilians held significant authority over the military. While this helped to centralize power and prevent military leaders from becoming warlords, it also resulted in a lack of experienced and capable military leadership within the Song ranks. The Song emperors relied heavily on their generals to defend the northern frontier, but these generals often lacked the autonomy needed to respond effectively to external threats. The Song military's initial response to the Khitan Liao Dynasty, which controlled much of the northern part of China, was inadequate. The Khitan, a nomadic people from the northeastern steppes, posed a significant threat to the Song, and their forces regularly raided northern China. The Song military was unable to mount a successful defense, and in 1004, the Song were forced to sign a peace treaty with the Liao, paying heavy tribute in exchange for a temporary cessation of hostilities. This treaty, while providing a short-term reprieve, revealed the Song dynasty's vulnerability to external threats and highlighted the limitations of its military. By the early 12th century, the Jurchen Jin Dynasty, which had risen to power in the northeast, became an even more pressing threat to the Song. The Jin were initially allied with the Song against the Khitan Liao dynasty, but tensions quickly escalated, and the Jin turned their attention to southern China. In 1127, the Jin forces captured the Song capital of Kaifeng, forcing the Song emperor to flee south. This event, known as the Jinkong Incident, marked the end of the Northern Song period and the beginning of the Southern Song dynasty. Following the fall of the northern capital, Kaifeng, the Song dynasty re-established itself in the south, with a new capital at Linnan, modern-day Hangzhou. This marked the beginning of the Southern Song period, 1127 to 1279, during which the Song rulers sought to defend their southern territories from the Jurchen Jin dynasty and later the Mongol Empire. The loss of the northern territories was a significant blow to the Song, but it also provided the dynasty with an opportunity to refocus its military efforts and create a more defensible border along the Yangtze River. One of the key features of the Southern Song military strategy was the development of naval power. With the loss of the northern regions, the Song dynasty turned to its maritime strength, building a powerful navy to defend the southern coast. The Song Navy, under the command of skilled generals, became one of the most formidable fleets of its time. It was used to patrol the seas, secure trade routes, and defend against invasions from the north. The Song dynasty's reliance on naval power was particularly evident during the wars with the Jin dynasty. While the Jin had a strong land army, the Song used their navy to launch raids along the coast and disrupt the Jin supply lines. The Southern Song also focused on fortifying key cities along the southeastern coast, including Hangzhou, which became a center of Song administration, culture, and trade. The city was heavily fortified and protected by a strong naval presence, which helped the Song dynasty maintain control over their remaining territories. Despite the Song's efforts to bolster their military defenses, they remained vulnerable to external threats. In 1234, the Jin dynasty fell to the Mongols, who had been expanding westward from the steppes. The Mongols, under the leadership of Genghis Khan and later Kublai Khan, turned their attention to China. The Song, already weakened by internal strife and military difficulties, were ill-prepared to face the Mongol invasion. The Mongol threat loomed large in the 13th century, and the Song dynasty found itself struggling to defend its southern territories against the rising power of the Mongol Empire. By the time the Mongols began their conquest of China, the Song military had been weakened by years of internal division, corruption, and a continued threat from the Jurchen Jin dynasty. When the Jin dynasty fell in 1234, the Mongols quickly turned their attention to the Song, and their forces began to encroach on Song territory. In the 1260s, Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and the leader of the Mongol Empire, launched a full-scale invasion of the southern Song. The Song military, although still formidable, struggled to cope with a Mongol war machine, which was highly mobile and well-coordinated. The Mongols used superior siege tactics and had a large and well-supplied army that outmatched the Song forces. The Mongol forces, including their skilled cavalry, quickly gained ground, and the Song began to lose key cities along the Yangtze River. In 1276, the Mongols captured the Song capital, Linnan, and the Song Emperor Duanzong was forced to flee. The Song military made several attempts to resist the Mongols, but their defenses were inadequate, and the dynasty's internal divisions made it difficult to mount a united front. The final blow came in 1279, when the Mongols decisively defeated the last of the Song forces at the Battle of Yamen, effectively ending the Song dynasty and marking the beginning of Mongol rule in China. The fall of the southern Song to the Mongols had a profound impact on China. The Mongols, under Kublai Khan, established the Yuan Dynasty, which became the first non-Han Chinese dynasty to rule the entirety of China. The Mongol conquest of the Song also marked the end of one of the most culturally and economically advanced periods in Chinese history. Despite the end of the Song Dynasty, however, many aspects of Song culture, including its advancements in art, literature, and technology, would continue to influence Chinese society under the Mongol Yuan Dynasty. In 1279, after the decisive defeat of the Southern Song, the Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, established the Yuan Dynasty, becoming the first non-Han Chinese dynasty to rule over all of China. This marked a major shift in Chinese history, as the Mongol conquest led to the dissolution of the Song Dynasty and the absorption of all Chinese territories into the Mongol Empire. The establishment of the Yuan Dynasty not only ended centuries of native Han Chinese rule, but also had significant cultural, political, and economic consequences for China. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, was the primary architect of the Mongol conquest of China. Unlike his ancestors, who had focused on expanding the Mongol Empire through military conquests, Kublai sought to establish a stable and prosperous empire by adopting elements of Chinese governance and integrating Mongol traditions. He recognized the importance of Chinese administration, culture, and philosophy, and he endeavored to combine Mongol military strength with Chinese bureaucracy. One of Kublai's first major acts as emperor was to officially declare the founding of the Yuan Dynasty in 1271, although the full conquest of the Southern Song was completed in 1279. Kublai moved the capital to Didu, modern Beijing, and set about consolidating Mongol control over China's vast territories. Kublai Khan, however, understood the delicate nature of Mongol rule over a primarily Han Chinese population, and he worked to establish policies that would bridge the gap between Mongol rulers and their Chinese subjects. The Mongol rulers initially faced resistance from the native Chinese population, who were understandably resentful of foreign domination. Many of the Chinese elite were displaced, and their positions in government and military were reduced or eliminated. To control the population, the Mongols enacted strict social hierarchies. At the top were the Mongols, followed by other non-Han groups, with the native Chinese being placed at the bottom of the social ladder. This hierarchy led to significant social and economic unrest among the Han Chinese, who were disenfranchised and struggled to regain their former influence in government and society. Despite these challenges, Kublai Khan's reign marked a period of significant administrative and infrastructural reforms in China. The Mongols promoted trade and commerce across the empire and attempted to foster economic growth. They also supported cultural and intellectual exchange between the East and West, facilitating the movement of goods, technologies, and ideas along the Silk Road. One of the most famous figures associated with the Yuan Dynasty is Marco Polo, the Venetian explorer who traveled to China during Kublai's reign and wrote extensively about the splendor and advanced state of the Mongol Empire. While the Yuan Dynasty is often remembered for its Mongol origins and military conquests, it is also significant for the way in which it integrated elements of Chinese culture, governance, and traditions. Kublai Khan, while a Mongol ruler, understood the importance of China's historical institutions and sought to preserve and adapt them for Mongol governance. His reign marked a fusion of Mongol and Chinese political practices, resulting in a unique form of rule that sought to retain Mongol military prowess while incorporating Chinese bureaucratic efficiency. One of the key challenges faced by the Yuan Dynasty was the need to balance Mongol traditions with the cultural and administrative expectations of the Han Chinese population. To gain legitimacy among the Chinese people, Kublai Khan embraced Confucian values and sought to consolidate power through the use of the traditional Chinese bureaucracy. Although the Mongols maintained a military hierarchy and a distinct Mongol aristocracy, they also relied on Chinese officials to manage day-to-day governance. The civil service examination system, which had been established during the Tang and Song dynasties, was retained during the Yuan Dynasty, though it was modified to accommodate the Mongol system of rule. Initially, the exams were limited to candidates of Mongol or non-Han origin, but over time, they were expanded to include the Chinese population. However, under Mongol rule, the number of Chinese scholars who could succeed in these exams was limited, as the highest positions in government were reserved for Mongols and other non-Chinese elites. This policy created tension between the ruling Mongol class and the Chinese population, as it perpetuated a sense of inequality in governance. The Yuan Dynasty also saw the continuation of major economic and technological advancements. Kublai Khan promoted trade along the Silk Road, which facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between China, the Middle East, and Europe. The Mongols introduced a system of paper money to further stimulate the economy, and they encouraged the development of infrastructure, including the construction of roads, bridges, and canals. This infrastructure development helped to enhance internal communication, foster economic growth, and improve the transportation of goods throughout the empire. Despite these positive developments, the Yuan dynasty faced challenges that ultimately contributed to its decline. The Mongols' inability to fully integrate the Chinese population and their harsh policies toward the native elite led to widespread dissatisfaction. The social hierarchies that placed the Mongols at the top and the Chinese at the bottom fueled resentment, and corruption within the government further weakened the dynasty. Additionally, the burden of military campaigns and the Mongols' extravagant spending put a strain on the empire's resources. The Yuan dynasty, despite its early successes, began to unravel in the 14th century. Several factors contributed to its decline, including internal corruption, economic mismanagement, and widespread social unrest. The Mongols, who had initially been able to govern through military strength and a combination of Mongol and Chinese administrative systems, found themselves increasingly unable to maintain control over the vast empire. The Mongol military, which had once been a formidable force, began to weaken due to internal divisions and a lack of resources. The Mongols' military campaigns, particularly in Southeast Asia and Japan, proved disastrous. The failed invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 were particularly humiliating for the Yuan dynasty, as both campaigns ended in catastrophic failure, partly due to the intervention of typhoons, which were later referred to as kamikaze or divine winds. These failures not only drained the empire's resources, but also damaged the Mongols' reputation as an unstoppable force. By the early 14th century, the Yuan dynasty was also facing severe economic problems. The Mongol rulers had introduced policies of overtaxation to fund their military campaigns and lavish court life. These policies created widespread hardship for the common people, particularly the peasantry, who were burdened with high taxes and forced labor. The burden on the peasantry led to widespread protests and rebellions, the most notable of which was the Red Turban Rebellion. The Red Turban Rebellion, which began in the 1350s, was a series of uprisings by the peasant class, who were frustrated with the Mongol rule and the hardships they had endured under the Yuan dynasty. The rebellion was fueled by a combination of economic hardships, religious dissatisfaction, and nationalist sentiments. The Mongols, who had long been resented by the Chinese population for their foreign rule, faced increasing resistance from the growing rebellion. In 1368, the Red Turban Rebellion culminated in the capture of the Yuan capital, Didu, modern-day Beijing, by the forces of Zhu Yuanzhang, a leader of the rebellion. Zhu Yuanzhang founded the Ming Dynasty, overthrowing the Yuan rulers and ending Mongol rule in China. The last Yuan emperor, Togon Timur, was forced to flee north to Mongolia, where the Mongols continued to hold sway in the region, but their control over China was effectively shattered. The fall of the Yuan dynasty in 1368 marked the beginning of a new era in Chinese history, the Ming Dynasty. The Mongols, who had ruled China for nearly a century, were overthrown by a popular uprising led by Zhu Yuanzhang, a peasant-born leader who would become the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty, known as Emperor Taizu. Zhu's rise from humble beginnings to the throne is one of the most remarkable aspects of Chinese history, as it represents the triumph of a common man over a foreign ruling class. Zhu Yuanzhang's successful rebellion, known as the Red Turban Rebellion, was fueled by widespread discontent among the Chinese population with the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty. The Yuan rulers had imposed heavy taxes, engaged in costly military campaigns, and caused significant economic hardship. This led to widespread peasant revolts, including the Red Turban Rebellion, which played a key role in the downfall of the Yuan. Zhu, initially a monk and later a military commander, gathered a large following of disillusioned peasants and defectors from the Yuan army. His leadership during the rebellion was instrumental in overthrowing the Mongols. After the Yuan Dynasty fell, Zhu Yuanzhang declared the establishment of the Ming Dynasty in 1368. He took the name Emperor Taizu and quickly set about consolidating his power and restoring stability to China. One of his first acts as emperor was to eliminate potential rivals by purging the remnants of the Yuan imperial family and their supporters. Zhu's policies focused on restoring Chinese control over the empire and reversing the foreign influence of the Mongols. He strengthened the centralized bureaucracy, re-established Confucian values in governance, and implemented land reforms to redistribute land to peasants, which helped gain their support. Emperor Taizu was deeply committed to Confucianism and sought to rebuild China based on its traditional values. He reintroduced the civil service examination system, which had been weakened during the Yuan Dynasty, and ensured that government officials were selected based on merit rather than birth. This focus on Confucian principles helped to restore stability to the empire, and the early years of the Ming Dynasty were marked by significant political, economic, and social reforms. Under the early Ming emperors, the empire was rebuilt through extensive reforms aimed at strengthening both the central government and the military. Emperor Taizu, keenly aware of the problems of the past, sought to ensure that the empire would not fall victim to the same weaknesses that led to the collapse of the Yuan Dynasty. One of his primary objectives was to strengthen the imperial bureaucracy, which had been a vital part of governance during earlier Chinese dynasties, particularly the Tang and Song dynasties. To achieve this, the Ming emperors reformed the administrative structure of the government by centralizing authority and strengthening the role of the imperial court. They established a hierarchical system of government departments, which oversaw different aspects of the empire, such as military affairs, finance, and civil administration. The most important of these institutions was the Grand Secretariat, which helped to coordinate the work of the imperial bureaucracy. These reforms helped create a more efficient and centralized system of governance, allowing the Ming emperors to maintain control over their vast empire. The military, too, was a critical focus of the early Ming Dynasty. In the early years of the dynasty, the Chinese military faced constant threats from both internal and external enemies. The Mongols, although overthrown, remained a significant military threat in the north, and the Ming rulers were determined to ensure the security of their borders. Emperor Taizu's military reforms included the establishment of a standing army, which was responsible for defending the empire and maintaining internal stability. The military was heavily reliant on conscription, with peasants required to serve in the army for a certain period. The Ming Dynasty also invested heavily in fortifications, most notably the construction of the Great Wall of China. The wall, which had been constructed in various forms over the centuries, was expanded and strengthened under the Ming emperors to protect China from Mongol invasions. The Ming Wall was not a continuous structure, but consisted of a series of walls, watchtowers, and fortresses that stretched across northern China. The construction of the wall was a monumental engineering feat and played a crucial role in the defense of the empire for several centuries. During the Ming period, the military also became more organized and professional. The military was divided into different units based on function, such as infantry, cavalry, and artillery. The Ming army was one of the first to incorporate firearms and gunpowder-based weapons on a large scale, including cannons and muskets. These technological advancements helped the Ming military become more effective in both defense and offense. The Ming military, under the leadership of capable generals, successfully defended China from external threats and maintained internal stability. The Ming Dynasty, particularly under the reigns of Emperor Taizu and his successors, became one of China's most prosperous and culturally vibrant periods. The dynasty's early stability and military successes allowed the government to focus on economic growth, cultural development, and technological advancements. Under the Ming, China experienced a golden age of art, literature, and scientific achievement that left a lasting legacy. One of the most significant cultural developments during the Ming Dynasty was the flourishing of Chinese painting and ceramics. Ming painters, such as Shun Zhou, Wen Zhengming, and Dong Qichong, developed distinctive styles that emphasized the beauty of nature, traditional themes of Confucianism, and Taoist philosophy. Ming paintings were characterized by their fine brushwork, bold colors, and emphasis on balance and harmony. These works are still highly regarded today and are considered some of the greatest achievements in Chinese art. Ming porcelain, particularly blue and white porcelain, is another hallmark of the period. Ming potters perfected techniques that allowed them to create delicate and highly detailed porcelain pieces that were sought after worldwide. The most famous of these porcelain pieces were produced in Jingdezhen, the center of Chinese porcelain production during the Ming period. These porcelains were traded along the Silk Road and were highly prized in Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Ming porcelain remains one of China's most recognizable cultural exports. In addition to art and culture, the Ming Dynasty saw a dramatic expansion of trade, both within China and internationally. The opening of China's ports and the establishment of a stable and prosperous economy allowed trade to flourish. The Ming court encouraged the development of maritime trade, and China became a central hub for goods flowing between East and West. This trade was facilitated by the famous voyages of the Admiral Zheng He, who led a series of maritime expeditions to Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, and even the east coast of Africa. These voyages, conducted in the early 15th century under Emperor Yongle, were among the most ambitious and far-reaching maritime expeditions of the pre-modern world. They helped establish China's presence in global trade and diplomatic relations. The Ming period also saw significant advancements in technology and scientific knowledge. The printing press, which had been introduced during the Tang and Song dynasties, was further refined during the Ming period. This allowed for the mass production of books, which facilitated the spread of knowledge throughout China. The Ming Dynasty was also a time of significant progress in fields such as astronomy, medicine, and cartography, as scholars sought to apply traditional Chinese knowledge alongside new ideas from Europe, the Islamic world, and Central Asia. The Ming Dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644, established a highly centralized and efficient government system, which allowed it to successfully govern one of the world's largest and most populous empires. Central to this system was the emperor, who held absolute power over all state affairs and was considered the son of heaven. The emperor's role was not only political but also spiritual, as he was viewed as the intermediary between heaven and earth. The emperor's legitimacy was based on the idea of the mandate of heaven, which asserted that the emperor's rule was divinely ordained but could be revoked if the emperor failed to govern justly. Emperor Taizu, the founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty, established the framework for the centralized government, which was then maintained by his successors. The government was divided into three primary branches: the central government, the provincial system, and the local administration. The emperor exercised direct control over the central government, which was responsible for making major policy decisions, appointing officials, and overseeing the administration of the empire. The Ministry of Personnel, for instance, was tasked with appointing civil servants and military officers, ensuring that the bureaucracy was composed of capable individuals. The central government was supported by a vast network of officials who were selected through the civil service examination system. These examinations tested candidates on Confucian texts and ideas, ensuring that those who entered government service were educated and morally upright. The Ming civil service system was one of the most rigorous in history, and it played a significant role in shaping Chinese governance for centuries. This meritocratic system allowed talented individuals, regardless of their social background, to rise to positions of power in the imperial bureaucracy. At the provincial level, the empire was divided into several administrative regions, known as circuit or province, known as Dao. Each province was governed by a governor who reported to the central government, but had significant autonomy in managing local affairs. The provinces were further subdivided into prefectures, counties, and townships, each with its own local officials. This hierarchical system of governance allowed the Ming Dynasty to exert control over its vast territories while ensuring that the local administration functioned smoothly. The local administration was crucial in maintaining order and collecting taxes, as well as in dealing with the everyday needs of the population. The local officials were often responsible for land management, judicial matters, and public welfare. This decentralized approach allowed the central government to focus on larger political and military issues, while local officials ensured that day-to-day matters were handled efficiently. However, as the Ming Dynasty progressed, corruption and inefficiency began to plague both the central and local levels of government. Over time, the government became more bureaucratic, and officials often engaged in bribery, extortion, and favoritism. This erosion of government integrity weakened the empire's ability to address pressing issues, including economic difficulties, military threats, and social unrest. Despite the government's early successes, these systemic issues would contribute to the eventual decline of the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty's military was initially one of the strongest in Chinese history, but over time, it faced significant challenges that weakened its effectiveness. The military played a critical role in defending the empire's borders, particularly from external threats such as the Mongols and later the Manchus, as well as in maintaining internal stability. The Ming military was built upon the foundation established by Emperor Taizu, who emphasized the importance of a strong, standing army. However, the military faced several key issues that hindered its effectiveness during the later years of the dynasty. In the early years of the Ming Dynasty, the military was relatively well-funded, well-organized, and effective. Emperor Taizu implemented a system known as the Weijing military system, which was based on local militias organized by the government. Each region was responsible for maintaining its own defense, and local military commanders were given the authority to recruit and train soldiers. This decentralized system allowed the Ming military to respond quickly to threats, both internal and external. The Ming also relied on the Jiai military system, which included a combination of conscription and voluntary enlistment. This system helped ensure that the empire had a large and ready supply of soldiers to defend its borders and maintain internal order. The military's effectiveness was further enhanced by the development of advanced weaponry, including firearms, cannons, and gunpowder-based weapons, which were used in both offensive and defensive operations. The Ming army was also known for its use of cavalry, which played an important role in both border defense and internal policing. However, as the Ming Dynasty continued, several factors contributed to the decline of the military. One key issue was the increasing corruption within the military ranks. Many soldiers and military officers began to engage in bribery and embezzlement, weakening the military's ability to perform its duties effectively. The increasing reliance on hired mercenaries rather than well-trained soldiers further contributed to the deterioration of the military. The Ming emperors also struggled to balance the demands of maintaining a large military force with the financial constraints of the empire. Another issue was the weakening of the Weijing military system. Over time, local military leaders gained significant autonomy, and some commanders began to act as independent warlords. This decentralization of military power eroded the central government's control over the military and made it difficult to respond to external threats. The rise of local military leaders also contributed to the breakdown of law and order in certain regions, particularly during times of social unrest. The greatest military threat faced by the Ming Dynasty came from the north, where the Mongol-descended Jurchen people, later known as the Manchus, began to rise in power. By the early 17th century, the Manchu forces, under the leadership of Nurhaci and later his son, Hong Taiji, began to push southward, threatening the Ming Empire. Despite efforts to defend the empire, the Ming military struggled to effectively combat the Manchu forces. The military's inability to repel the Manchu invasion ultimately led to the fall of the Ming Dynasty and the rise of the Qing Dynasty in 1644. The social structure of the Ming Dynasty was heavily influenced by Confucian principles, which emphasized hierarchy, family loyalty, and respect for authority. At the top of the social hierarchy were the emperor and the imperial family, followed by government officials and the military elite. The bureaucracy, which was composed of civil servants selected through the imperial examination system, played a central role in governing the empire and maintaining social order. Below the officials were the merchants and artisans, who played an important role in the economy, but were often viewed as lower in status due to Confucian values that prioritized agriculture over commerce. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the peasants, who made up the majority of the population. The Ming Dynasty was fundamentally agrarian, and the peasants were the backbone of the empire's economy. Agriculture was vital to the empire's survival, and the government heavily relied on the agricultural output of the peasantry to fund the military, the bureaucracy, and the administration. Peasants were also required to pay taxes and provide labor for public works projects, such as building roads, bridges, and fortifications. The peasants' position in society was precarious, and their lives were often marked by hardship and exploitation. While the government sometimes attempted to ease the burden on the peasantry by enacting land reforms and reducing taxes, these efforts were often unsuccessful due to corruption and inefficiency within the administration. Land ownership was highly concentrated in the hands of wealthy landowners, and many peasants lived in debt bondage or were forced to rent land from landlords who exploited them. Despite their lower status, the peasants were a powerful force in Ming society. Peasant uprisings were common, particularly when taxes became too burdensome or when local landlords took advantage of their position. One of the most famous peasant uprisings during the Ming Dynasty was the Wangji Rebellion in the early 17th century, which was fueled by widespread dissatisfaction with the government's inability to address the needs of the common people. Peasants were also central to the economy's growth during the early Ming period. The government's promotion of agricultural reforms, including the expansion of irrigation systems and the introduction of new crops, helped to boost food production. This agricultural surplus allowed for population growth, urbanization, and the expansion of commerce. However, as the Ming Dynasty entered its later years, increasing economic difficulties, military pressure, and social unrest led to growing discontent among the peasantry. These conditions contributed to the eventual downfall of the dynasty. And that concludes today's journey through the remarkable history of the Tang, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. What can we learn from this era? The moral of the story is clear. The strength of an empire lies in its ability to adapt and evolve, but also in the resilience of its people in the face of adversity. Whether through military might or cultural innovation, each dynasty faced challenges, but it was their response to those challenges that shaped their legacy. Thank you for joining me today on this History Channel. If you enjoyed this deep dive into China's fascinating dynastic history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be back with more captivating stories from history that you won't want to miss. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and I'll see you on the next video.